Hello and welcome to another edition of The Cross and Pen. If you like this content, please click subscribe and like this video. So, 2 weeks ago, we talked about lies and deceptions. And I talked about the difference between the two. And I related everything back to Jesus and his comments about not being deceived, especially in the last days. Now, these comments can be taken a couple different ways. Some people think these comments relate to those who are going to come and claim to be him or to be false prophets, and that is true. But one of the things that I also discussed was how deception can occur beyond just imitating, or not imitating, but impersonating Jesus or claiming to be from him. And then last week, I talked about the rapture, which is the complete removal of the church from the earth. And it will be the first truly global event in history because it's something that's going to occur simultaneously around the world, every nation, every country at one time. So it is going to be literally the very first global event in history. And it's going to have cataclysmic effects. But before we get too far down that road and talk about the cataclysmic effects from the rapture, we have to look a little bit about, or look into a little bit of the deception that is slowly being set up. Now, this deception started probably in the 50s when stories from Area 51 started to emerge. People started to talk about UFOs, strange objects in the sky. Some people said, oh, I work there, I smuggled out these pictures, autopsies of aliens, Martians, little green men, that kind of thing. And those stories have been going on for a long time, and they've been the lure of many a conspiracy theory. In fact, there are people who spent a significant part of their lives watching Area 51, doing research into it. There have been some documentaries on it. There have been people who have climbed through the woods in the wilderness to be able to look down on Area 51 in public land, which incidentally is no longer public, because they felt that there was something going on. Now, in my lifetime, I grew up in the early 70s all the way through that decade, and right at the beginning of the 70s was the tail end of the Apollo moon mission, the last mission to the moon. The last Apollo mission was in the early 70s. I remember seeing clips of that on the news. And so I grew up right on the very tail end of the NASA program when astronauts were the heroes. You go to the store and every little boy had a little toy rocket, looked just like the Apollo rocket. And space exploration was really a big thing. And it led into many television shows, inspired some movies. There was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there was E.T., Star Wars, Independence Day, the movie Alien. There have been many books that were written about extraterrestrials that I'll talk about here in a moment. And so with this whole idea of life on other planets and UFOs and strange sightings that people claim to have, it became something of folklore, where people said, oh, these things have happened, but they can never really be substantiated. And any evidence that was brought forth was quickly dismissed as being fabricated or unverifiable. So for a long time, most of my lifetime, the idea of UFOs, the idea of aliens, was really something for conspiracy theorists, was not given any credence whatsoever. Now, in the past several years, what has actually happened that has been sort of interesting is the government has come forward and started to release information about UFOs. And they are now substantiating these claims, and they're saying, no, they're valid. Yes, we've seen these objects. Our pilots have seen them. They've reported them. In fact, video footage is available. You can find it on the internet. That was just in the past year where some Navy pilots, their story was released, and they themselves, you can find it on YouTube, were interviewed about what they saw. So Ironically, the paradigm has shifted from UFOs being something that was for, kooks and crackpots to something that the government is now standing behind and is actually putting forth as valid information. And so why is this? Why has there been this shift? Well, I think that the reason for this is simple, and that is that we're getting closer and closer to the fulfillment of end times prophecy. And that end times prophecy, quite simply, is going to be the rapture of the church. And so if you watch Israel, if you look at what's going on in the Middle East, you look at current events between Hamas and Israel, you watch Iran, you watch Russia, Turkey, all these nations are in biblical prophecy. And they are all acting in ways that are fulfilling biblical prophecy or about to fulfill biblical prophecy. One of the big things on the horizon currently is potentially the Gog-Magog war. Now, some people think this will happen before the rapture. Some people think it'll be after the rapture. In either case, it doesn't really matter, because when it does happen, the rapture is going to be imminent. So why is that important, and how does that relate to lies, deceptions, and UFOs? Well, all of that is mixed together, because for those people left behind, for the people that I'm talking to, the people who dismiss the Bible as a book of myths, just fables, things that are made up, people who don't believe any of it is true, for those people, they're going to be left behind. Plain as it. As Tim LaHale documented in his, or chronicled, I should say, in his Left Behind series, it's going to happen. And those people are going to be stuck. And so when those people are left behind, the powers that be, the government, is going to need a way to explain the disappearance of literally millions of people around the world simultaneously. So, how do you explain that? Well, you can't point to the Bible and say it's the rapture, because obviously you don't believe the Bible. Now, will there be people who may have been exposed to the Bible who are somewhat aware of the rapture that get left behind? Certainly, because they had friends, they had neighbors, they saw something on YouTube, they read an article, but they dismissed it. So they chose not to believe. So they're left behind. Now, those folks may turn to the Bible, may pick it up and say, hey, we need to read this. And if they do, great. But for everybody else that's left behind, there's going to be the need for an explanation. How do we explain this disappearance? Well, the only way that can happen is through something that is plausible and something that has been in the making for many decades. Something that the government has hidden for a long time, but is now standing behind, and that is the idea of UFOs, of extraterrestrials, of aliens. Because if you have UFOs, well, you must have aliens to go with them, because somebody's got to be flying these things, right? They're not just out there flying around. This isn't some elaborate drone that somebody has. There's somebody flying these things. So the two go hand in hand. Well, look at Hollywood. Hollywood has been backing this claim since 50s, 60s, and so forth. Star Trek, Star Wars, and so forth. Numerous shows. Interestingly enough, in the 1970s, there was a show called Project UFO, in which 2 Air Force personnel went around the country and investigated claims of UFO sightings and tried to explain them and dismiss them. So, and that was propaganda by the government to demonstrate to people that such things just weren't real. They were weather balloons, or it was an airplane, or it was just something that somebody thought they saw but really could never be substantiated. And so those claims were all dismissed. But we've kind of come full circle now, where the government has slowly been releasing information and substantiating those claims. Why? Because it's part of end times prophecy. It's part of the setup to explain the disappearance of millions of people. And so, while UFOs are most likely the product of the devil and his influence in the world, they are not of God, because God doesn't talk about aliens or UFOs in the Bible. And the Bible, for believers, is the chief source of knowledge and wisdom. And so if there's nothing in the Bible that substantiates aliens and UFOs and life on other planets, then it can't be true. So if you end up watching this at some point and millions of people are gone from the planet, remember that this plot, this deception, has been set up for a long time. And it's not a man-made deception. Man is the one carrying out the deception, but this deception is of the devil. It's his deception. Make no mistakes about that. It's his deception. And he has been the one orchestrating it since the Garden of Eden. That's really where the grand deception started, in the Garden of Eden. When Eve was deceived and man fell, that's all part of the grand deception. And so, as we go forward, watch the news, you're going to see claims of more and more UFO sightings. There's going to be more information being released by the government to substantiate those claims and to also shed light on the subject, because again, we're going to need a common enemy. We're going to need something to focus on in order to bring about a one world government, a one world religion, and a one world currency. So when you have this cataclysmic event that removes a significant portion of the population from the planet, you have that, and you combine that now with the explanation, which is UFOs. So now the world has to unite to defend itself against this common enemy. Well, for that to happen, you need a one world order, and people will willingly jump at the chance to do that to save themselves. So keep that in mind. If you like the content, again, hit subscribe, share it with your friends, click like, and until next time, my name is Bill.